Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 727. I'm Tom Cagley, your host, and today we are recording remotely using the old traveling setup in a basement in Frederick, Maryland. In the SPaMCAST 727, we discuss the assumptions behind Little's Law and neglected WIP. Some of the assumptions you can cheat to generate useful conversations, but there are limits, and you need to be upfront about what you're doing. We also have a visit from Susan Parente, who brings her Not A Scrumdamentalist column to the cast. In this installment, Susan answers a listener's question about the complications of a team with 2 developers and 5 managers. Yeah, that can't end well, can it? Using neglected WIP and cheating on mathematical assumptions. There are several assumptions that are embedded in the conversation of neglected WIP. As someone who is trained in math and quantitative methods, I recognize that assumptions are important and need to be respected. 4 of the critical assumptions are: 1. The system being measured is under control. One test I use for this assumption is whether the amount of work entering and exiting the system is nearly the same, and that there are no wild swings in performance. 2. Work items are of similar size. The test I use for this assumption is whether the teams involved break work down with the anticipation of getting it to a size that it will complete within some time box. In Scrum, that time box is the sprint. There are other time boxes that people use. There will always be variability. So things being exactly the same size, that's a non-starter. 3. Work that starts normally completes. I use the term normally in this assumption because in knowledge work in general and software specifically, we all know that stakeholders change their minds. When that happens, work that enters the process should be canceled. If this is more than a rare condition, however, the system is not under control. 4. WIP doesn't vary wildly between the start and end of the period being studied. In Kanban, this is easy. Scrum's fixed time boxes, where the board should start empty and end empty, is a little bit more problematic. In Scrum, I shade the assumption by measuring mid-sprint to mid-sprint. I know it's a hack. The assumptions make Little's Law and neglected WIP mathematically sound. A bit of potentially inappropriate sharing. I sometimes cheat on assumptions when I use the concept of neglected WIP as a conversation starter. Occasionally, teams need something to help them shift their perspective when doing a retrospective or an ops review. Neglected WIP is useful even if you have to cheat on an assumption or two to help highlight or triangulate a problem. Note, any cheating on an assumption needs to be done transparently. For example, if a team's Kanban or Scrum board has 100 items scattered on it, and more than a handful of those items are older than dirt, that's pretty old, I think it would be fairly safe to say that the system is not under control. You could also make the argument that the assumption about things entering and completing, that's number 3 above, might be a problem also. The violations of the assumptions would suggest not using the calculation of neglected WIP. But using the calculation of neglected WIP is useful in a retrospective for at least 2 reasons. The last time I used neglected WIP with a team staggering from the amount of WIP, work in process, they were carrying, and with less than an under control process yielded 1. The use of the neglected WIP provided a second point of reference to what should have been painfully obvious, but was chronically rationalized. The team had a serious addiction to heroics. Simply put, the team was churning, switching between work, which made the amount of context switching awe-inspiring to an outsider. The calculated neglected WIP provided a frame of reference that was harder to rationalize away. Absolute mathematical precision was less important than breaking through the rationalization in that case. The loose calculation of neglected WIP gave the team a goal to start working toward. In the retrospective where we introduced the concept, the team started working on ideas to throttle the uncontrolled work entry process. The ability to see WIP and neglected WIP recede provided the team a level of motivation they used to drive process improvement for several months. Having a goal helps to generate impetus. The example is an illustration of why abandoning one of the key mathematical assumptions underlying neglected WIP and Little's Law is useful if done carefully. I'm not suggesting that abandoning mathematical assumptions can be done with absolute impunity, nor am I suggesting that when done, it should be hidden. That would be lying, by the way. I am suggesting that sometimes it can be useful, and sometimes being useful is really what is important. Thoughts, comments, all welcome. Please feel free to reach out to us at spamcastinfo@gmail.com. I look forward to the conversation.
Susan Parente, keeper of the I'm Not A Scrumdamentalist column. Welcome back to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Hey, Tom, it's great to be here. This is always fun to do, and I'm always amazed. My students will come back to me and say, hey, I listened to that podcast, or every now and then I'll find somebody on LinkedIn. I was listening to your podcast. I'd like to connect with you. So I'm really glad to hear that, and I think this is great. I think this is fun to do. I always learn a lot from you, Tom. I know you say the opposite to me, but this is a fun endeavor. So thank you for having me here.
I am glad that you're here. And I think those relationships where everybody learns are the best relationships. Susan, another letter. I know last time we dealt with a letter. Let's deal with another letter that I recently got. Dear SPaMCAST, my team has a Scrum Master, Product Owner, Team Lead, and Project Manager. All of those are separate human beings. And we're doing Scrum-ish. What do I do? And that was signed, everybody is my boss.
Sounds like it. Sounds like everybody's your boss. Well, everybody's my boss. I feel your pain. As a contractor, I remember years ago, my parents were much younger. I brought them into my workplace, and it was a federal space. And I was introducing them. I said, "Oh, this is my boss. This is my boss." My mom said, "Everybody's your boss." I'm like, "Yeah, that's contracting. That's what it looks like." So I feel your pain. Scrum-ish, yeah. So Tom, did he say how many people were on the team?
If we count the Scrum Master, and we count the team lead, and we count the project manager, and we count the product owner, all of which, are generally, could be part of the team, 6. There are 2 people that do the work. I happen to know this person. There is an open rec for a third person, but that rec has been open for about 6 months and they haven't interviewed anybody. So I don't think it's real.
So you got 2 people and 4 people telling 2 people what to do.
Heck yes. Isn't it great?
Is this a federal government contract?
No, not even close. This is a commercial company that is making billions of dollars of profit per quarter.
So yes, it does appear that everybody's your boss. So I'm kind of curious. I have worked on Scrum projects, or technically Scrum-ish projects. So just to be clear to our listeners, so in Scrum there are 3 roles and 3 roles only. They are product owner, Scrum Master, team member. Done.
Bingo.
What about done? No more. So where's the project manager? There isn't one. right? So that's that. Now, I have worked in many Scrum projects where there was a project manager also, and it is confusing to me. I'll tell you that. I've had recent experience with, I have a project manager, but what about, where's my product owner? Well, that's kind of your project manager. Well, do they know enough detail about the user stories? Not really. Like, oh, okay then. I mean, I guess they can kind of prioritize, so that's fine. But so I'm in sort of a coaching role right now, and so I'm getting a lot of these things thrown at me, and kind of what do you do? And it's challenging because these are decisions that are made at an organizational level that's much higher up. And as a contractor, I can give my opinion, but it's just that. Can't really make those decisions. So everybody's my boss. This is a difficult situation. So first of all, Scrum Master, I don't mind. They should just be holding on to the process, which, by the way, the Scrum Master should be yelling at the PM and team lead and say, you are not needed here. We're doing Scrum. So, I mean, obviously Scrum Master is not doing a good job. I know that because there's roles other than Scrum Master. Mm-hmm. So there's that. I can almost kind of see the PM because, I mean, I'm still not entirely clear about what that is. Like it depends on the organization, but I have seen Scrum implemented where they throw in a PM. I don't know if they're doing reporting or something else. I mean, if you got a PM in there, you're at least doing some kind of hybrid. You're not really doing Scrum. But then you got the team lead too. I don't know. Actually, now that I look at it, I'm like thinking that this actually reminds me of some of the projects I worked on recently, which is actually a little bit scary because you don't necessarily sit there and think about these things. I value team leads, as a PM for traditional and as a Scrum Master for Agile or a product owner for Agile. It's great to have a team lead, but technically you're not supposed to have one in Scrum. I will say that even in the self-organized team, somebody's going to emerge as a team lead. It's usually a factor of, quite frankly, leadership, ability, experience, subject matter expertise. This just naturally happens, right? If you put 5 people together, you're going to end up with somebody in a leadership role. That's kind of what happens in a self-organized team. Now, if they're given that role, that's a little bit less organic, and that's probably not as good. I don't necessarily have a problem with somebody taking a lead as a self-organized team, but it's a little bit different when they're given that role, because there may be somebody else who really is the lead behind the scenes, but doesn't have that title. So I'm thinking to myself, you probably brought this up because you want kind of a solution. So I'm a little bit like thinking one solution could be work on your resume. So
interestingly enough, that was the first recommendation that I suggested to this person. Obviously, they don't want to do that, but that maybe have to be their fallback plan.
Yeah, I mean, it's first of all, if you're getting requirements of things to do from a Scrum Master, that's not good. I can see a team lead having a say. I can see that, obviously the product owner should have a say in what you do. The PM shouldn't, because if the PM's having a say, well, what about the product owner? And, this brings something to mind, Tom. We have all these roles and we have the structure about how things ought to be. But what actually ends up happening? What ends up happening in organizations is leadership happens, right? So let's say I have a client example actually where it's sort of a portfolio, okay? And there's a bunch of different projects. Some projects have Scrum Masters, some have product owners, some don't have product owner. I think all of them have Scrum Masters. What that Scrum Master role looks like ends up being different as a factor of who the Scrum Master is, like what their leadership skills are. Okay. So by nature, I am this like facilitative kind of leader. Okay. So So I'm going to be Scrum Master in a different way than if I was a delegating kind of person, right? And so it's interesting because I get it on paper. These roles are supposed to be a certain way, but when you put actual human beings in there, if you put a person in a product owner role who is a weak, fearful, timid person, and maybe even on top of all that, which is not necessarily consistent with that, but is an introvert, that's not going to happen, right? There's like a certain, if they're an introvert, but they're a strong person and they're confident and whatever, then they're fine. But maybe if there's a leadership quality in here that I'm trying to get to, and it doesn't. And extrovert and introvert show up in there by how people actually are in a group. I was told, for example, okay, so this is somebody came to me about a Scrum Master who wasn't doing a good job, and one of the issues was that the team was driving the Scrum Master instead of the Scrum Master driving the team. Now, some of that you could say because of their ill experience, lack of experience being a Scrum Master, but some of that's a personality thing. So me, when I was green, wet behind the ears, whatever you want to call it, if I was given a role, my inclination would be to drive, even if I don't know where we're going, right? So this is just my inclination, right? So now the Scrum Master shouldn't be driving the team as far as priorities go, but to just stand up and say, okay, here's what we're going to do. Here's what we're going to do, guys, or guys and girls, but oftentimes my teams end up being just guys, but here's what we're going to do, guys. Right. And it's my inclination to operate that way. And so some of these things I think occur in this cadre of people, product owner, Scrum Master, PM, and team lead. Who's actually in charge there is probably more a factor of personalities and leadership than it is of actual role. That's one of the things I'm finding. So when this coaching thing that I've done with this portfolio is kind of brought to mind that projects are not all managed alike, even inside of an organization, because people are different. So if you put different people in the same role, the way they're going to operate is going to be different, especially if the organization is implementing Agile or they're implementing Scrum. That how that shows up on one team versus another is probably more a factor of leadership and self-organization and personalities than it is of like how the organization was structured. Do you know what I'm saying, Tom?
Yeah. No, I do. It's in this circumstance, it's obviously one of those that is extremely just sort of on the edge. So many overhead positions and two people. The unfortunate part is in the organization that these people belong to, because I tend to poke. If you're going to write me a letter, you better expect to get some questions back. This is not abnormal. There are, at least they could identify 2 or 3 other teams very quickly. Obviously, this organization thinks this is a useful approach to getting work done. Someone in, whether it's the senior management of the organization or in the HR chain, has said, thou shalt have these roles and somebody has to fill them. And it's like, in the conversations, it is hard to get anything done because, very frankly, everybody has an opinion. Everybody's telling the 2 people. One of the things that they confided in that's not in here was that one of the things that has occurred is that people tend to get sick or take the day off on sprint planning. Or during their big sprint reviews. So it ends up being just one of the, and I'll use the term developers loosely because, most of this is not true development, but again, they're voting with their feet by trying to avoid this because it ends up in conflict.
It's a difficult scenario. It's funny that both you and I said I'd work on my resume, but there's a problem with an organization when there is more management than people who are doing work. It doesn't take Warren Buffett to know that's a poor investment. And we don't think of it as an investment, but when you work for somebody, it is an investment. It's an investment for your time. And, we could be on the precipice of a recession. And I don't know if people are looking at this or thinking about it, but where you don't want to be is in an organization where you could potentially be laid off. Okay, so if your organization is doing poor things that would make it not an organization that Warren Buffett would want to invest in, and then you might be considering that going someplace else, because if an organization is mismanaging its staff and we go into a recession, there's going to be layoffs, and
Sure.
That's the organization that's going to be hit. The organizations that are running lean, that are doing the right things, they will make it through a recession. Organizations that are hanging on by a thread will not. And so, do think about if you're working someplace where things are mismanaged, you are investing yourself in that, and be concerned, because if something does go askew, and I'm not a financial analyst, but I'm just saying if there are layoffs, that's not an organization you want to be in,
No.
right? Because
Absolutely.
you're more likely. I mean, I don't think we think of the organizations we work for as being an investment, but most people work more than 40 hours. And even if you do work 40 hours, you're mentally and emotionally invested in the work that you do. And so an organization that has so much management and so little people working, they're probably not going to create a lot of good work product, in my opinion, because it just doesn't make any sense that they would, or it's going to be so costly that they have no profit. All those middle management people cost money.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you have any span of control kind of conversation, there's got to be a lot of upper management to support all that middle management.
Yeah.
The question is, and the question I pose back to them is, how do you have this conversation with your senior leaders? Because the span of control and the amount of overhead is just way too high in terms of putting people at the coalface to actually get product out, to get value to the customer. If our goal in any of this stuff is to deliver value, I think you're right. That's I wouldn't invest my money in that personally.
Yep. So don't invest your time as a person who's working there. And, if you would have Jeff Sutherland look at this, you know what he would say? Waste, waste, waste. That's what he would say. He would say, product owner, you need that. I need to know what the priority is for the customer. Scrum master, I need somebody who knows the process. Everybody else should be on the team. Done. Everything else is waste.
Yeah.
It's just waste. Waste is waste.
Yeah.
I mean,
put people to work.
Is four people looking at two people working. That's waste. So,
or better yet, help managing. It just ends up in micromanagement purgatory or something along that line.
Yeah. So that's rough. That's rough. And I do have compassion, because I have often, and even maybe now, could say everyone is my boss. And that is kind of that itself is not the reason to go. But I think that, talk to somebody higher up in the organization and say, is this a valuable use of resources?
Yeah.
Are we getting the job done? And hopefully you have a champion higher up that will listen to you. If you do, they would be really, really brilliant to hear you. And anybody who in upper management will not listen to a person doing the work is also not making a wise decision for the organization.
Yeah, agreed on both of those points. Susan, if people wanted to continue the conversation, how would they go about doing that?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Susan Parente, and I'm listed in the DC area, though I work all through the Northeast corridor. Or you can email me, Parente at S as in Sam, the number 3-tec.com. I would be thrilled to talk to you about anything Agile, Scrum, or any other method. And also, if you're using traditional, want to go to Agile, not quite sure how to make that happen, or interested in a certification, please let me know. I know a lot about a lot of them and happy to give you some guidance.
In Reread Saturday News, this week we begin our reread of Extraordinary, Badass, Agile Coaching, The Journey from Beginner to Mastery and Beyond by Robert Galen. This week we begin with a few notes on the logistics of the read and then review the 2 forewords. Remember, Jeremy Willits and I have developed a work entry workshop. Out of control work entry? No Agile for you. If you're interested, email us at tcagley@tomcagley.com or willitsjm@gmail.com. We look forward to bringing you the workshop. In the Software Process Measurement Cast number 728, we will feature our discussion of product leadership stances. Developing an understanding of product leadership stances will highlight product leadership gaps and strengthen your product focus. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?